According to GreenBiz, insured values of properties in 1,000 eastern coastal countries are reported to be $10 trillion. Insured and uninsured values of all structures across the United States potentially exposed to weather and climate change, or violence as it is put here, easily will reach well over $100 trillion. So how will the effects of climate change on the long-term value of real estate in investment portfolios look? To answer that question, we are now joined via Skype, Mauritius, by YPO member and CEO of Grit Real Estate Income Investments, Bronwyn Corbett. Bronwyn, thanks very much for joining us. You are scaring with some very big numbers there. Are they justified?
Yeah, no. So it's, in relation to, just the real estate sector and the size of the numbers that we are talking from an asset value perspective. So the numbers are very, very big. And as you mentioned, so, the topic today around the impact of what sort of the ESG climate side has on the impact of real estate. I mean, our portfolio is focused across Africa. We have over $600 million worth of assets on the verge of doubling that portfolio in 7 countries. And even in frontier markets of Africa, these ESG factors are very, very prevalent and very prevalent to our investors as well. So they are a key aspect in our business that needs to be monitored on an ongoing basis.
But I suppose we are also talking about the impact of climate change on real estate, and we have never really thought about it like that. When we talk climate change, we're talking about what will it do to our agriculture, what is it going to do to our farmers?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the whole element of ESG and climate change and aspects, as you mentioned, have not been specific to the real estate sector at all. And that's actually not, as I said, just not frontier markets, but even in stable markets and more advanced markets. But, the reality is that the sort of challenges around climate change and the impact, and actually some of the big cities that you've seen impacted by these events of magnitude, and whether that is a hurricane or whatever else has come out of the climate change aspect, can have such a material impact on the actual real estate sector itself, to the point whereby, historically you would have got insurances to be able to cover these types of risks. And even the insurance companies are now saying, from a cost perspective, are these risks adequately priced?
Yeah.
Because, historically, climate change wouldn't even have been a consideration on real estate. So the probability of an act of God, as they would call it, an insurance policy, was so not probable that this type of insurance was so cheap. Now, as a real estate holder, you're having to look at it, because I think the impact currently and the impact to secure against this risk is going to become more and more costly going into the future, but absolutely imperative.
Absolutely imperative. In fact, we saw it here in South Africa when we're looking at the results of the major insurers, Old Mutual, Santam, as well as Sanlam. Those numbers certainly were impacted by factors to do with climate change, so it's going to become a big issue, which then suggests that we are likely to see policy changes around that area. Potentially, what should we look at? And are we looking at perhaps a steep increase in subscriptions because of that?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly that. So I think we've already seen it. And I mean, it goes beyond, any sort of risk profile that increases and whatever that might be. I mean, we work in Africa, and our real estate is based in some very, very difficult markets. And we, to insure against these items, and whether it's acts of terrorism and those type of risks, for us, this climate aspect and the ability to do damage to buildings. I mean, we're based in Mauritius, as you know, our business is based here, and I just look at the whole cyclone aspect of and just how impacted this island has been. And we've got assets here, we own hospitality assets, and just how rigorous the actual processes around the threat of a cyclone and all of those aspects that happen. And historically, you would have seen a threat of a cyclone maybe every 10, 15 years. Now it's becoming more and more real in Mauritius. So these insurance companies are now looking at it and saying, firstly, we might not insure at all, or secondly, this cost of insurance is going to be double of what we've given you. So when we do our feasibilities now and we work out sort of the value of these assets, these become quite substantial costs in the calculation of our net income figures and the calculation of the valuations ultimately. So, it's a real aspect that has to be considered.
Yeah. Is there anything that governments can do on that front, or is this something that is best left to the markets? Because when you talk about Africa, of course, you talk about drought more than anything else. Yes, cyclones on the eastern, and I think mostly on the eastern coast, but certainly the major impact will be drought.
Yeah, so I think I think drought is a big aspect, and I mean we've obviously seen the impact of it in Cape Town of late, and this obviously in South Africa itself, and we see the impact in the regions. I think for me, governments can't only solely work on aspects of any sort of risk, and especially sort of ESG climate control aspects. I think or climate change risks. Yeah. I think it's something that has to be discussed jointly between government and the private sector, and the ability to really just work together to try and manage these aspects and build in the necessary infrastructure and all of these things that these assets need. So for example, and I'm going to use Mauritius now because we have a substantial holding in Mauritius. We have over about $200 million worth of assets sitting in Mauritius. Things like when you have an asset, whether it's a hospitality asset or an office building, and you have to have the ability to keep these buildings operational. It takes additional costs on having generators, water tanks, the ability to bring in water when there isn't water coming through the system. And unfortunately, government can't be the sole sort of provider of that. You as a builder or a property owner or as a developer need to make sure that your building itself is sustainable and is able to operate should there be a crisis of nature. And the fact of the matter is that if you don't give that to your tenants, for example, they will go to other buildings where they will get those aspects. So whether it's the ability to still have electricity all the time, still have water all the time, business can't stop because inherently because of drought and all of those things. I mean, we've seen it in Cape Town, the same thing. So, that part of it becomes very important that say, that there is no water, and we've had a lot of water shortages actually in Mauritius as well. You have to have the ability that your tourism sector can still continue because the tourism sector is the biggest industry in Mauritius. So if you don't have tourists coming to your island because you've got a drought situation, it's a major impact on the economy. Hence why the private and the government sector have to work closely together.